Michelle, it is such an honor to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Michelle. Look, I've I've been thinking about this interview. I can't wait for this discussion. We've been trying to connect for a while, but you're so busy right now with everything going on. We're going to talk about your brand new book in a moment, but your background, U.S. Air Force fighter pilot, and let's go back. Was this always your plan? Was it always a dream to be a fighter pilot and with the Thunderbirds?
No, definitely not. And that was a fun story to share because I think it surprises people, especially considering I did end up flying for the Thunderbirds. I would often get asked, "Hey, how old were you as a kid when you went to an air show and you saw the Thunderbirds fly and you decided that's what you wanted to do?" Because so many kids do have that experience.
Yeah.
But I grew up in a small town in northern Wisconsin, about 4,000 people, not a military or an aviation family. And so I just didn't really have exposure to that world at all. And so I was a really shy, introverted kid, but I was also very adventurous. I grew up out in the country, so I was constantly climbing things and jumping off things and outside all the time. And I ended up in high school having very good grades. And my parents were like, "Hey, let's put those to use. We don't have a college fund for you. So let's consider scholarship opportunities." Turns out the military has great education benefits. So Air Force ROTC kind of rose to the top. So I got a scholarship through them, went off to college as a criminal justice major because I planned on doing 4 years on active duty to pay back my scholarship time. And then I wanted to get out and apply to be an FBI agent.
No.
Yeah, so
Oh my.
completely different, right? So this is my grand plan as like a 17-year-old. So I do go to college as a criminal justice major. That's actually what I graduated with. But halfway through college and ROTC, I visit Air Force Base with my detachment. So we go down to Florida to Tyndall Air Force Base. I get to stand on the ramp and watch two F-15s take off in full afterburner. And that was like the equivalent of my childhood air show moment
Oh.
because it was like a visceral reaction of just like goosebumps, like, holy crap, forget the FBI. How do I go do that?
So that was the moment, huh?
It was for sure. And I had always been intrigued by flying. I thought it sounded fun and exciting, but I definitely also during that time was struggling with like confidence. And I had this idea that fighter pilots were super type A, like just didn't feel like who I was.
Yeah.
But that moment I was just so excited by seeing those jets that I was like, I don't care. I'm going to compete for a pilot slot and let's give this a go.
Oh man, do I love that story. By the way, Medford, Wisconsin. I grew up
Yep.
in Minnesota, and
Okay.
did I see University of St. Thomas grad?
I am. Yep.
So I went to Concordia College up in Moorhead, Minnesota. But
Yep.
St. Thomas, what a great school. St. Paul, right?
It is, yeah, and it's beautiful. And I honestly wasn't familiar with it until I got that ROTC scholarship, and then I got a flyer in the mail from St. Thomas that was like, "Hey, we used to be a military academy. We have this great partnership with our ROTC detachments, where the university will cover any tuition that the Air Force doesn't cover."
Oh wow.
Which private school, like that was a great deal. And I went and visited the campus, and it's just beautiful. I felt like I was at like Hogwarts or something, and
It does
I
have a
was like,
great
I want
look.
to go here.
It does have a great look. Well, that's really interesting. Okay, so then from a small town now to flying that F-16, but what was that process like? How do you actually get to the Thunderbirds? I mean, the top of the top.
So much has to happen. It's, I think, the perfect intersection of some timing and luck with a lot of hard work. And, deciding you want to be not just an Air Force pilot, but a fighter pilot. Like I
Oh,
went in with that goal, not just I'm going to get my wings, but I want to be a fighter pilot specifically. And I had to go through about 3 years of training, going from having 0 flight hours, having ridden in a small airplane one time, but never having been at the controls of one, to getting selected to fly the F-16, to spending a year flying that before I go to my first operational like combat squadron. And to put kind of that into perspective, I go into pilot training with 25 people in my class. Halfway through, there's a split where a small portion of the class starts flying a different training aircraft that's focused on a fighter bomber track. So to get into that small group, you have to be in the top half of your class. And then there were only 6 spots. So I made that cut. Now there's 6 of us. And what we were seeing from previous classes is that the Air Force had somewhere between 1 and 3 fighter aircraft available per class. So less than half of us are actually going to get a fighter, even though we're on that track. So my class of 25, we ended up with 2, and I got one of them.
Oh my.
So that was a surreal moment, but I still can't believe all of that happened. And definitely some of it was just timing, that my class could have only gotten 1. You just don't know. It's all about the timing of the Air Force and what they need and assignments coming down.
Okay, that is remarkable. You were not the first female pilot with the Thunderbirds, but during your time there, you were the only female pilot on that team. Do I have that correct?
Yes, and that's a common misconception, I think, that I was the first, which I'm always correcting. So Fifi Malakowski in 2005 was the first female Thunderbird pilot, and I was actually the 4th one to fly in the demonstration.
Wow. The Delta formation then for the Thunderbirds. Where were you in that formation? You were the lead solo pilot for the Thunderbirds. What does that mean exactly?
Yeah. So when the Delta is all together, the jet that's in the very front is Thunderbird 1, who we affectionately call the boss. No matter what his actual call sign is, he always goes by the boss. So he leads that entire 6 jet formation, as well as the entire 130 person squadron. But within that formation, we all have numbers and positions. And so I was a solo pilot, number 6 my first year, number 5 my second and third year, which doesn't mean a lot for most people. But basically, I got to fly on the far left spot in that 6 jet formation, the furthest left aircraft. So way out there on the end of the whip, which was always fun. But then as solos, a lot of the time you would see just 4 jets together in what we call the diamond formation. And the other 2, myself and the other solo, would be split off, and we would be doing single jet maneuvers, just really showcasing all the capabilities of the F-16, doing some head-on passes that we call the opposing pass, which those are always very shocking to the crowd, doing a lot of flying upside down, really fast, high G, fast climbs. Being a solo was super fun because you kind of got to do all of the things, and you didn't have to spend 45 minutes looking over your shoulder the same direction where your neck's cramping up. So I really loved being a solo.
Well, Michelle, thank you for the service to our country. I know you also served in Afghanistan, but serving the Air Force and the millions of other veterans that are serving, have served. Just thank you very much for what you did for our country.
It was my pleasure. I really had a pretty amazing career. Looking back, I realize how lucky I was to have such a cool career with so many amazing experiences.
Hey, do you ever really stop and realize what the Thunderbirds mean to the culture in America? Doing flyovers at the Super Bowl or Daytona 500, is it lost on you on the number of goosebumps you're giving as you're flying over these stadiums?
I think sometimes you lose perspective on how unique and privileged of a position you're in. Like the history of the team since 1953, like I mentioned, so much has happened for that organization during that time, right? Like blood, sweat, and tears, lives have been lost. Like the patriotism and the symbolism and all of the things that the weight of that brand that falls on your shoulders when you're wearing that uniform, they really try when you show up to explain that to you, and not just be like, hey, you're about to do a bunch of cool flying and get to do a lot of cool things like the Super Bowl, but like this is all that this brand stands for, and this is what it means to so many people, and it's not just about you, it's about this patch and this entire organization. And I think the Thunderbirds as a whole does a really good job of that. So it creates this really mission focused team that realize that they're bigger, or they're part of something that's bigger than themselves. And when I do lose perspective on it, I think the thing that always brings it back for me is either going and seeing the show myself. I've only done that a few times since I stopped flying, and I still get goosebumps.
Do you?
Or I still like flinch when the solos do their opposing pass and it looks like they're going to hit each other. And I know the secrets behind this. Like I know how it all works, and I'm just like, oh, or I'm like, wow, that was awesome. I think standing on the ground and having the music paired to it and the narration and the energy of the crowd. And it's a good reminder to me, despite having been in that cockpit that I'm watching, how cool it is. During COVID, our air shows were canceled. And so we did the city flyovers, the America Strong flyovers.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, which was a whole thing, quite the logistical planning nightmare, but super impactful. And I remember the very first big one we did is honestly one of the hardest flights I've ever flown in my whole career. We did the Air Force Academy graduation flyover. Normally we would land there and do that. We flew in from Vegas, air refueled, held, pushed to go over the stadium right as all the graduating cadets throw their hats in the air, talk about like timing, you have to nail that one. And then we did this front range flyover all the way up the front range in Colorado for like
Oh,
300 and some miles in low level flying formation. The weather was low, it was snowing. We air refueled a bunch of times. It was really task saturating as a pilot. Like a lot of focus, a lot of stress.
unreal.
That was the first big one we did. So it was kind of like testing to see if this really was going to have the impact that we wanted. And we planned our route based on where hospitals were located because this was like the peak of the pandemic. It was like March, April, May time frame for those. And we started getting messages and emails afterwards. And there's one that I really, really remember. This woman reached out and she said that her dad was a Vietnam veteran and he had been in hospice, and she wheeled him outside to watch our flyover, and he like started crying.
Oh,
And he ended up passing away, of course, not long after that. And she said it was just like the perfect moment for them to appreciate his service and like, understand that he was at the end of his life. And it was just a terrible time with it being COVID. And that's just one example. And so as you start to get those messages, you're like,
unreal.
that was 3 seconds in the cockpit that she happened to see us passing over. But you are really, really impacting people at a deep level.
Oh, that's incredible. Thanks for sharing that story. When I first learned about you,
Yeah.
I said, "Oh my gosh, okay, female fighter pilot. Here we go." And one of the biggest ahas I had was watching you on Instagram. You talked about how you struggled with and battled imposter syndrome,
Mm-hmm.
and my jaw dropped. Fighter pilot, the Thunderbirds. So tell me more about that dynamic for you over the years.
Yeah, it really ebbed and flowed. And hindsight being 2020, that feeling of imposter syndrome, of feeling like I wasn't as qualified as the people around me and like I somehow had snuck in despite meeting all the same standards, and like I was just the worst one there, which was never the case in retrospect. But that feeling really became prominent when I was a beginner at something. And so I think you gain some skills as you get older and your competence in your career increases and your confidence increases with that, to kind of have perspective on imposter syndrome. But I think especially when you're younger and you go into a super high performance environment, it's the perfect recipe for it. So, I go to school on this scholarship. I'm a really good student. I get one of those 2 fighter jets out of pilot training. I go fly my first choice of airplanes, the F-16. I am like, despite being shy, introverted, and struggling with confidence to, I would say, like speak up. Like I always struggled with that because I was shy. I was just crushing these goals one after another. And then I get to my first combat squadron in Japan, and everyone around me is an experienced fighter pilot. And now I'm getting into the job where it's really not even about flying the airplane. It's about tactics and communication and planning and thinking. Like the complexity of the things you're having to do is just so much higher than it was in all of the training programs. And I get there and I go from being pretty good at things, or at least learning things within weeks to months, to now being somewhere where it's going to take years to get even semi-decent at these skills. And you layer into that being one of 2 women in the squadron.
Right.
And I think with that disparity of being such a minority in that world, you really do feel like you have to overprove yourself, and you have to really just show that you deserve to be there. And I found myself not asking questions, even though I had them, or, not admitting when I needed help, because in my mind, any of those things kind of indicated that I wasn't the right type of person to be in that role.
Wow.
Which that just sets you up for failure. So now you find yourself in this self-fulfilling prophecy where you have all the pressure of performing for the job. You're putting all this pressure on yourself to prove that you're a woman who deserves to excel in a man's world. And then you are afraid to make connections and show vulnerability to find mentors and let people know you need help, because you feel like that shows that you don't deserve to be there. So you find yourself isolated as well. And it just sent me into like a very difficult, I would say it was over the first 2 years for
Was
sure. It
it?
was a long time. It was rough. For sure the hardest time in my entire career.
So was there a point then when it got so low that you thought about quitting? And how did you then get out of that?
Yeah, I specifically remember after a particularly difficult flight and getting like harsh feedback in the debrief, coming home, sitting on my kitchen floor, crying, which is like something I tried not to do in that world at all, and feeling trapped. Like trapped by this goal that I had chased down, achieved, and now was actually in, and feeling like I couldn't deliver what I needed to actually live up to the expectations in that world. So I owed the Air Force a 10-year contract after pilot training.
Hmm.
And I think more than that, you could get out of it, of course, if you wanted. They would reclass you into a different job. Like they would never force someone into the cockpit who was just like, I don't want to do this job. That would be dangerous. But more than that, it was this idea that quitting would be associated with an epic failure and shame and embarrassment. So I felt like stuck between a rock and a hard place where I realized how hard I had worked and then I got there. Now I feel like I can't live up to the expectations to be there, but I can't leave because that's failing and that's shame and embarrassment. And that's like the thing I'm avoiding in the first place. So it was really a feeling of being trapped and considering quitting, but not really thinking it was an option. And I just had to keep showing up every day. And sometimes it was super, super hard. But with time, I got better, of course. Like your skills do improve. But eventually, the end of that assignment, I was kind of at a point where I realized showing up and not letting people know when I needed help, pretending to be someone I wasn't, like playing dress up and pretending like I had everything together even when I didn't, like not showing up authentically, I was just burned out.
Hmm.
By the end of those 3 years, I was like, I can't do this for another 10 years or 8 years from now. So I go to my next assignment in Texas, brand new group of people, brand new location. And I kind of have this epiphany where I'm like, okay, I'm now a flight lead. I have several hundred hours in this aircraft. I'm like starting to know what I'm doing in the actual jet. And now is an opportunity for me to decide who I want to be in this new unit. Like, how do I want to show up that day one? Do I want to show up and pretend I'm this type A assertive fighter pilot that I've been pretending to be while I struggle quietly?
Hmm.
Or do I just want to show up and be honest and just see what happens? And I realized that I'd really held myself back from a ton of things in Japan because I was so afraid of failing. Like when opportunities would come up for different things to like lead a mission or go on this work trip or whatever it was, I would be like, I wouldn't volunteer, but more than that, I would be like, please don't pick me because now I'm in a spotlight where I might fail.
Really?
And like you obviously, especially being new in a job where you need to learn a lot, you're missing out on a ton of learning opportunities when you avoid that stuff. So as I got to Texas, I was like, okay, I'm going to show up here. I'm just going to be who I am. We're just going to see, take it or leave it because I don't have the energy to pretend anymore. And I'm also going to push myself to say yes to opportunities that, you know, get me excited that I really think I should go after, but that also come with that feeling of fear of failure and doubt. And I don't know, they feel scary. And I started to do that. And I didn't start with massive things overnight. It was really small things like taking on tiny projects or, you know, I'm in a brand new city and I'm an introvert. Now I need to make new friends.
Right.
So like forcing myself to go do that social situations that felt uncomfortable. And over time, really having like intention behind, I call them SBCs, small bold choices. They started to stack up and they became bigger. And I think 6 months in, a year in, I was doing things that I would have never had the courage to do when I showed up there. And honestly, in about an 18-month period, it completely transformed me as a person, both
Really?
personally and professionally.
That's so good. I love the question of how do I want to show up? And I want to bring myself and put my time and talents into this. Otherwise, you're just kind of going through on autopilot.
Yeah, it was really that intentionality. And I think that question of how do I want to show up, an even better way to look at that is like who do you want, what type of person do you want to be?
There you
So
go.
when something comes up and you're like, oh, I set my alarm and now I'm like, oh, I don't want to go to the gym this morning. I want to just sleep for another hour or two. You're like, do I want to be the type of person that just stays in bed every morning? Or do I want to be the type of person that doesn't look fit and healthy? You know what I mean? And when you turn
Good.
into like this identity, I think it's a lot more compelling and motivating to do the thing that's going to serve you in the long term.
Boy, do I like that. And I know the iDairy podcast listeners are all shaking their head on that. Okay, you were in the Air Force for 13 years.
Yep.
And what was the moment you said, you know what, it's time for something different?
Yeah. So to kind of fast forward, I go through that time period in Texas. I thought the flying sounded really challenging, exciting, something new. But I think a bigger draw was the mission of the team and just that inspiration you get to have. And I had had a few moments where I'd gotten to interact with the public, and I got to see how powerful it was for girls and women to see someone that looks like them doing something like I was doing. And I saw the value in that specifically with the Thunderbirds, because that squadron's mission is recruit, retain, and inspire. So literally inspire is part of their official mission. And being an introvert, I initially struggled with the public persona side of the Thunderbirds because I felt like I was just learning my job when it came to the flying, and trying to be this public figure, almost like a Disney World character where you have to be on and friendly and engaged all the time, really drained my social battery. And so I struggled with that a little bit. Get to my third year, my last year, and those moments of inspiration eventually become my favorite part of the job.
Oh, wow.
I couldn't tell you exactly when that happened, but somewhere there in the middle, probably as air shows started back up after the pandemic, I settled back in. I started to really just feel the emotional impact when I would have those interactions, especially with girls, like young girls, kids. A lot of parents would drag their 8-year-old daughter up to me in the autograph line and be like, look, she just flew that jet you just watched.
Wow.
And as those dots connected, you would just see their eyes light up. You would see them going from, being kind of quiet and shy and not really wanting to talk to me. And then when they realized, they would just be like, and some of them would have a million questions. Or there was this one little girl that's like, I'm going to take your job someday. And I was like, yes, please.
That's excellent.
Please do. And so I really loved that part. And I wanted to figure out a way to continue to do that once my time on the Thunderbirds ended. My body was super beat up from pulling 9Gs constantly for 3 years. I was dealing with a lot of like neck and back pain. So I realized that flying fighters for another 7 years might not be the best thing for me physically. And then this mission shift. So as I look at options, I'm like, okay, I'm going to get out of active duty. I should go fly for the airlines. That's what everyone does when they get out of the Air Force.
Yes.
But then again, I thought of the part of the mission that I really loved. And I was like, I feel like there's something that I'm the right person at the right time. The audience is here. There's this massive movement to empower women in STEM. And like everything just seems to be aligned perfectly. And around that same time, I got asked to do my first speaking event, but it was far enough out. It was after I would be off of active duty, so I could say yes. I went and did it. It was really well received. It was really cathartic for me to get on a stage and talk about self-doubt and imposter syndrome and fear, all these things I had struggled with so much, but I literally never talked about. And people found it really relatable, like surprisingly relatable based on my background. And it was great. Like I loved it. They loved it. And that was 3 years ago. And it's been awesome.
Well, it feels like you tapped into your why or your purpose. What do you think?
I think it was unexpected, but I also think I got really good at just zooming out and figuring out what I really wanted and if the choices I was making supported that instead of just going with the flow. And I think, deciding I wanted to be a pilot was one of those moves. Applying to the Thunderbirds was one of those moves. And then again, kind of doing something that's definitely out of the norm, leaving active duty 7 years short of a full retirement, leaving behind a cockpit of a fighter jet, which is a dream job for so many people. And I'm like, this is not just for a soundbite. I've truly never felt so aligned and so clear on my why as I have the last 3 years.
Oh.
It's been incredible. I have no regrets of hanging up, flying, and just the interaction. I wish people could take a look into my email and my DMs or behind, like be on my shoulder after a keynote when I have conversations with people in the audience. The impact is pretty awesome. That's why I do this.
That's fantastic. Good for you. Happy for you. So now here you are, a brand new author as well. You have a brand new book coming out called The Flipside: How to Invert Your Perspective and Turn Fear into Your Superpower.
Yes.
I got to know why this book and why right now?
Yeah. So, I get out, I start speaking, and I'm seeing the impact from the keynote I'm giving. I'm seeing the impact from the social media content I'm creating. But I also realize how fleeting those things are. And I know I have so many more stories to share. And I think stories are the best vehicle to teach through. And most of them need more of a long form content to really have the impact to get across everything. So I start thinking about it. I'm about 6 months into speaking. I'm like, I think this is something I want to do. Started working on it late that first year. And so it's been about 2.5 years. It'll be 3 years by the time the book releases since I started it. So it's been going on in the background for quite some time. But as I started to nail down the format, I realized I didn't want to write just a memoir. I didn't want to just tell stories. And I didn't want to just write a self-help or a business book where it was just like 3 techniques to do whatever. I was like, there's got to be a way to marry those two things together where I can tell this incredibly unique, high-stakes story from the cockpit of an F-16, but I can take readers into what it was like for me to experience that stress, that moment, or the joy or whatever it was, how I responded in that moment, why, what the general culture of being a fighter pilot taught me to handle those moments. And then we rooted all of that in human psychology and kind of put a lot of research and numbers behind why we react the way we do to stress or fear. And then from each chapter, we pull out these takeaways that anyone can use to help overcome self-doubt, to help take bold action. So again, it's surprisingly relatable. It'll be intriguing because of the flying stories, but I wanted to leave an impact where people could walk away and be like, because of this book, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. And I think that I did that.
That's great. Well, it sounds like your message from stage is definitely making a difference. For those who are listening, who are still cannot believe that even you deal with imposter syndrome or self-doubt, what would be one thing that someone could try or do to get a little bit of momentum back on that?
Yeah, I think a great first step is just to recognize that everyone experiences it. I still am learning this. I still have my moments where I know I'm going to get on a stage and talk about vulnerability and fear and all of these like touchy-feely topics that aren't normally associated with military or fighter pilots. And I look out at the audience from behind the stage and I'm like, it's not going to resonate with this group. Like I went and spoke to 800 sheriff's deputies.
What?
And I look out at them and they're all in their uniform. It's mostly guys. It's a culture that's not known for their vulnerability.
Tell me about this.
And I'm like, oh, this is going to be the one where they're just like, cool story. Like, that's not for us. I get up there, I give my speech, and there was a line of these guys afterwards to have a one-on-one conversation. So many of them were like, we need to talk more about this. That I felt like you wrote that for me.
That's so
I've
good.
struggled with that my whole career. And I'm even like, I am supposed to be the subject matter expert up on the stage talking about this. And it still is a great reminder for me. And a lot of times I'll realize as a speaker, I'll see that maybe it's like an older guy who might be approaching retirement age. And I'm like, he probably doesn't need to hear this, right? Like he's super experienced. The guy might actually have an expression on his face where he looks like really bored or almost like disgusted. Where as a speaker, I see his facial expressions and I'm just like, oh, that guy thinks this is so stupid. That guy is always in the line to talk to me afterwards.
Really?
And almost always is like, I'm about to retire and I don't know who I'm going to be. And that was super powerful. And I've realized that those people that sometimes have those facial expressions or like might appear disinterested or disgusted or whatever, a lot of times it's because they're thinking about their own things and it's actually really, really connecting with them. So I say all that to say it is the most normal human experience. So I also want people to normalize it. And I think a great way to do that is to share that you're experiencing it with someone else. I think if I had found that person I could confide in Japan on my first assignment and been like, hey, I just really feel like I'm not qualified, and these are kind of how I'm viewing all these things, they would have been like, well, here's all the evidence that shows that that's not correct. And B, I felt exactly the same way when I was new. And so it's gaining that perspective on it, normalizing it. And I think diving into figuring out where it comes from can be super powerful. I call that inner voice the inner critic. And I think we all have something from our background that kind of shapes what our inner critic looks like, sounds like. And so I always encourage to people to actually write down and be like, when does it get really noisy? If it was like a physical person, what, like, describe its attributes, or what does it sound like? And now give it a name. And I've done workshops on this, and then we'll often share with each other. And so many people have had like these aha moments where they're like, I've realized I'm running my work decisions through this one mean girl that was at my office on my very first job, who I literally haven't talked to in 15 years. And she's still in my head.
Really?
Or this teacher from high school that was like embarrassed me in front of the whole class. Or a super critical parent. And for me, being in the public spotlight and putting myself out there so much on social media, through the book, for a long time, I realized that before I would post something that felt vulnerable or that felt kind of outside the norm of what fighter pilots do, I had this idea that there was this perfect fighter pilot, like an older guy, super experienced, super tactical, right? Like God's gift to fighter pilots, who is judging what I was doing. That person doesn't exist. They're just like a conglomeration of different points throughout my career where I felt like I didn't live up to what a fighter pilot should be. And I was allowing myself to screen my decisions through this made up person, even after being out of the Air Force.
That's incredible. My takeaway from all this is the reality that everyone battles imposter syndrome. Whoever you deeply admire right now and think they got it all going on, Michelle, there was a point where they didn't know what they were doing. They're working through the same self-doubt, imposter syndrome that we all are. Would you agree on that?
Definitely. I think that's one of the things I've tried to do with having this kind of illustrious byline of being a former Thunderbird pilot, is to pull back the curtain and be like, yes, I did that. And I'm a normal person, and you can go do exceptional things despite feeling all the doubt that you're feeling.
That's great. What a great takeaway message. Before I ask you a couple last questions here, Michelle, on the area of imposter syndrome, I know I gave a presentation about imposter syndrome, how to manage it. I want to see if you agree with this or not. Here are the three things, Michelle. First off, find a mentor, someone who you trust and loves you enough to give you feedback. Find that mentor. Second is to be a mentor to someone else, because then you remind yourself that, holy smokes, I kind of do know what I'm doing here. I really do have some knowledge to share. And the third is to get into action. It's easy to get paralyzed, but get into action and just keep moving. Okay, you're really an expert in this area. So what do you think? Am I close? What would you add to that?
You nailed it. I talk about all those things in different forms. And I think that second one of becoming a mentor, even if you're not super experienced and far along in your career or whatever it is, because when you shift that spotlight from being so focused on yourself and hypercritical of every little thing you say and do and worrying about other people's judgment, and you shift it to someone else and how you can impact them, it really reduces those feelings of doubt and imposter syndrome.
That's great.
That is one of my favorite things to tell people, is to shift that spotlight to the impact you can have on other people.
It's good. Easy to get in our own head. The flip side, how to invert your perspective and turn fear into your superpower. What would you hope that someone would think or do differently as a result of reading this incredible book?
That's a great question, because it goes to that third thing that you just mentioned. I want them to take action even when they're scared. I want them to take action even when they don't feel ready, because confidence shouldn't be a prerequisite for acting. It's doing the thing, taking the action, that builds the confidence. And I think we often find ourselves swapping those, and it can make us feel stuck.
That okay, I got to go back on that. So that's a key point. Really? So you're saying action precedes motivation, I'm paraphrasing, versus waiting to get motivated and then getting into action. You sure?
I think that every time you you take action, and that's where I get into those small, bold choices. And I think it doesn't have to be something massive. It can be the tiniest little, most doable thing that you can do right now, because that feels so much easier than being like, I'm going to climb this whole mountain today. And there's a really good chance that you will succeed at that small thing. Every time that you do that, you build this proven track record to yourself that you are capable. You put money into the bank of like, yep, I've had this experience. It's a known quantity. I know I can do it. And that is what just raises your confidence over time. And it eventually you get into this loop where you're like, I could do anything.
Hmm.
All I have to do is start small and show up again tomorrow and do it again and again the next day. And now your confidence is just building at a really rapid rate. But if you're not at that point yet, make yourself take that small, tiny, bold step. Just focus on that. Don't worry about the whole elephant. Just focus on that one thing and then repeat that. And, that's what the whole book is about. Cool flying stories, yes. Great takeaways, yes. But if people had to do one thing with the entire 300 pages, I hope that when they have that moment of inspiration where they see those jets take off or whatever their equivalent is, they're like, I should listen to that. And despite feeling scared and uncertain, I'm going to go try and do the thing.
Ah, well, your book, The Flipside, I have it ordered. Mine's arriving on September 9th, I believe. And so I can't wait to read your book. Michelle, you are a fantastic follow on Instagram. What is the best way to follow you and everything that you are up to? You're doing a lot.
I am. I would say Instagram is one of the best places. I regularly create content, update people on there. So that's just Mace underscore Curran. So MACE, that's my call sign underscore my last name. My website is macecurran.com. Book info will pop up there. But honestly, if you just search the Flipside or my name on any of the normal book retailers, Barnes and Noble, Target, Books a Million, Amazon, of course, you'll see it come up there.
Good. You may not know this, but at the end of every episode, I ask my guests, what is your I Dare You challenge for all of us? Before I get your answer on that, though, I've always wondered this. As you are doing, let's say, a Super Bowl flyover, and it's got to be timed just perfectly. Can you sum up in a few seconds how do you do that? How do you time it, perfectly?
Yeah, a lot goes into it, a lot more than people imagine. So a lot of it comes down to the singer. We rehearse the day before with the singer and get exactly how long it takes them to sing the national anthem.
Ah,
And they have to be good. They have to do it the same on game day as they did on practice day. So that can really screw things up if they don't. So we know that. We have number 8 from the Thunderbirds, who's the narrator. He's also a pilot, but he doesn't fly in the demonstration. He's usually up in the broadcast booth at the field. So he is with like the producer for NBC or ABC or whoever it is that has the show timing down to like the second. And we're 25 miles away holding in essentially a big oval like 30 minutes before we do the flyover. We're up there.
really?
And we're just getting updates on time, 3 minutes behind, 2 minutes behind, 2 minutes ahead, whatever it is. And we're like, okay, constantly recalculating our TOT, our time over target. And then there's a certain point where the train has left the station. All 6 jets are headed towards the stadium. We're joining up to close formation. Once we have pushed, as we call that, pushed down track towards the target, which is the stadium, there's limited amount of timing adjustments that we can do because now it all comes down to throttle adjustments and, going super fast or ripping the throttle back to idle and trying to slow down doesn't bode well for looking good in formation.
Never
Right?
thought about
It'd be
that.
like slamming on the brakes with another car next to you. Like they're probably going to get out of position.
Right.
So we do get calls as we're getting closer where it's like 10 miles out and then number 8 will be like on time. Or he might be like 1 second ahead or 1 second behind. And the boss will be like, okay, pulling it back. And it'll like make minor adjustments. It is an art at that point. Like mostly
I
up
can't
until then,
imagine.
it's just a communication and a coordination game. End game, it is an art that comes down to quick communication and quick decision making from the boss and quick communication to the rest of us in the formation on his part. And those of us on the wing, we are just fighting with every ounce of our being to stay in formation as good as possible. And you
Really?
don't even know when the racetrack or the stadium is in front of you because you're staring at the jet next to you. You really only like see it go under in your periphery. And you're like, oh, it's over. Guess we did the thing. And then you land and you wait to see the pictures and videos. And you're like, I hope it looked good.
Oh my gosh. I just simply can't imagine that. It means so much to the country and to these events. That's why I had to ask. So, okay, Michelle, now, what is your I Dare You challenge for all of us? The one thing that you would ask us to try or do to live a better life. What do you think?
Yes. So I do this with my keynote audiences. When this show ends, or if you can pause it as long as you're not driving, I have them put their hands on their chest, so like right above their heart, and I have them close their eyes. And I spend about 15 seconds on stage. I do it myself as well. And I'll open my eyes a few seconds early before I say anything, and I will see an audience of sometimes thousands of people, all with their eyes closed in like just silence. And during that time, I tell them to think of one specific thing that they've really been wanting to do, something that gets them excited, personal or professional. But I think we all have those things that pop up in the back of our mind that we're like, someday I want to try this. Someday I want to take a flying lesson. Or someday I want to start a nonprofit. Or I really know I should ask for a raise, but I'm scared to. Or, whatever it is. And I just ask them to nail down one super specific thing. And then as we end that moment of like silence, I have them take out their phones and write it down. Because I don't think most of us ever sit distraction free and are forced to come up with something in that little short amount of time. And of course, I've just been on the stage and been really vulnerable with them and talked about how I found the courage to apply to the Thunderbirds, all the things. So they're in the right headspace to do it.
Right.
But I think it's such a simple exercise. And the number of people that have gone and done that thing that have followed back up with me now over the last 3 years, that's what's changing people's lives. And so everyone, take that time for yourself, seriously 30 seconds, to be like, what is something I really want for me, not for anyone else, not for my spouse, for my kids, for my boss. What is something that I've been wanting to do? It just hasn't been a priority. I'm probably a little bit scared. Sure, I might fail at it. Let's give it a go.
That is such a great I Dare You challenge. Thank you for that. Everyone, the name of the book is The Flipside, How to Invert Your Perspective and Turn Fear into Your Superpower. We just had a chance to hang out with the former U.S. Air Force Thunderbird pilot, author, and motivational speaker. Michelle, this has just been fantastic. Thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.